now like to welcome Hamza Hameed sir, qualified lawyer with an advanced LLM from Leiden University in Air and Space Law. Mr. Hameed is currently working as a legal consultant at UNIDROIT the Rome in Rome, where he primarily works on international secure transactions law. He leads under UNIDROIT's work on the implementation and advancement of space protocol of the Cape Town Convention. He is also closely involved with the Cape Town Convention academic project and is the manager for fundraising and administration at the UNIDROIT Foundation. Sir, please.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you very much to Professor Bhatt, to Professor Khan, and to Professor Lee for a very insightful first session. And thank you to the Symbiosis Law School in Hyderabad for the kind invitation. As Dr. Kamal mentioned, it would have been an honor to be in Hyderabad right now to deliver this presentation and speak to all of you about some of the new and upcoming activities taking place in the space sector, but I certainly hope to be able to do that sometime in the future. I'm honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking to all of you over the next 15 to 20 minutes about the importance of a uniform system of secure transactions law in order to promote asset-based financing in the space sector, and primarily the space protocol of the Cape Town Convention, which is an international treaty designed exactly for these purposes. As was mentioned in the introduction, and as also mentioned by Professor Bhatt in his excellent and extensive introductory session, I work for an international organization called UNIDROIT, and we largely work towards harmonizing and uniforming international commercial law instruments. So I thought I'd start off by sort of laying out the scope of what the private space sector is, and then digging into the importance of the Uniform System Secure Transactions Law to the space sector, and then sort of concluding with a few hypothetical examples of cross-border financing of space equipment to see what all of this is that I'm talking about. And this slide here doesn't really need to be stressed that much, keeping in mind that the other presenters have already gone into an introduction. But this is sort of an outlook of the global space economy in 2019, where the entire global space economy was worth over 360 billion. And this is divided into several segments, including ground segments, including space segments. And then on the right, you'll see how this development has grown over time. So as you can see, between 2009 and 2018, there was only 230 satellites that were launched on average, whereas between 2019 to 2028, the number has gone up exponentially. And as some of the previous presenters also mentioned, what we use space for has also started to change, such that while in the past, most satellites that were being launched were either telecom satellites or satellites for security services, the prevalence of Earth observation satellites and satellites for the Internet of Things has grown quite a lot. Now, as Dr. Bhatt already mentioned, as the space sector has been growing, the amount of private capital flowing into the space sector is also growing quite fast. These charts on this slide sort of showcase this to a certain extent, where they point out that over the years, the number of private investors in the space sector is growing quite fast, and the numbers which you can see on the right in the millions are also growing quite fast, such that between 2000 and 2006, the total investment was about 1,300 million, whereas between 2000 and 2018, which is a much broader time frame, or if you just look at the third column, 2013 to 2018, it was almost 10 times as much. And all of this private sector investment that's coming through is coming through with various different models, and this includes venture capital, private equity, acquisition financing, seed financing, and all of these are items that are quite important when it comes to the private space sector. Now, when you think of the space sector, many people like to think of the most developed countries in the world, the countries that have large resources, large amounts of budget to spend in these areas. But that's more and more not true anymore, such that if you look at this chart as to where all of these private investments are either coming from or going, you'll see that there's a diverse and large number of countries where private space activities are now taking place. Dr. Bhatt already mentioned some of the activities taking place in India, but broadly across the Asia-Pacific region, including in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, and in Central Asia, there is a lot of space activity taking place, and a lot of the space activity is indeed being financed by the private sector. So when you look at the space sector, and when you historically look at the space sector, you would have always found that actors and companies within the space sector, besides receiving government funding, usually relied upon the financial capacity of their founders. So even now, when you think of some of the big space names that you always see in the news, to SpaceX or Blue Origin, a lot of their financing comes from the pockets of their founders and their owners. Traditionally, private entities have also relied upon mechanisms to attract finance, such as equity financing, mostly through venture capitalists or angel investors, unsecured lending based on the creditworthiness of the entity, or project finance. And then I understand some of the things that I'll be talking about are slightly technical and complicated, so I'll certainly be sticking around for the question and answer sessions. If anyone has any confusions or questions, I'd be very willing to address them. So now, as we looked at, the number of actors being involved in the space sector from different parts of the world is growing quite fast. And then when you look at these three types of financing, private financing, which is equity financing, unsecured lending, and project finance, these are only applicable to a certain type of space company. And these are the very traditional space companies. So traditionally, as most of you probably know, the space industry was comprised of AAA rated companies which have relatively easy access to credit due to their financial stability and creditworthiness. These are companies that rely on obtaining either equity or project finance from lenders at a very acceptable rate, keeping their on-ground balance sheet as collateral. And they've also very heavily often been financed by their own governments that deal with them favorably, considering the importance of the space sector. The space sector is now changing. The space sector is moving more and more towards a new space sector, which is composed more of private entities, smaller entities, and entities looking to profit off of their space activities and have innovative financial models. And this is exactly where the Cape Town Convention comes in. So the Cape Town Convention is an international treaty system which is designed to promote asset-based financing for the leasing and financing of specific types of high-value, mobile, and uniquely identifiable pieces of equipment. The Cape Town Convention... Yeah?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are unable to view the slideshow of your PPT.
Okay. Let me try.
You could maybe put it on slideshow mode.
Right, just give me a second.
Apologize for interrupting, sir.
No, I'm glad you did that. Okay. Is that better? Can you see it now?
Yes, sir, we can see it. Could you once try changing the slide?
Did it change?
Yes, yes.
Excellent. So, okay, and please do interrupt me if it stops again. I'm not too sure why I did that. Okay, so I was talking about the Cape Town Convention and its various protocols. So the Cape Town Convention is an international treaty that's designed to promote asset-based financing in various different sectors. It does this by having specific protocols for specific sectors. And up until now, there are 4 protocols to the Cape Town Convention. The first one being for aircraft equipment, the second one being for rail equipment. The third one, which will be the focus of my presentation today, relates to space assets, and then the fourth one being specific to mining, agriculture, and construction equipment. Now, I'll run through some of these slides quickly so that we can talk about the space protocol a little more. The Cape Town Convention in itself has 82 contracting states and has also been approved by the European Union. And the aircraft protocol of the Cape Town Convention has 79 contracting states and is widely regarded as one of the most successful commercial law instruments in the entire world. The main objectives of the Cape Town Convention are sixfold. Firstly, it facilitates the acquisition and financing of economically important items and mobile equipment by providing for the creation of an international interest, which will be recognized in all contracting states. It tries to provide the creditor in any financing transaction with a range of basic default and insolvency-related remedies, and where there is evidence of a default, a means of obtaining speedy relief pending final determination of a claim, to establish an electronic registry for the registration of international interests, which will give notice of their existence to third parties and enable the creditor to preserve its priority against subsequently registered interests and against unregistered interests in the debtor's insolvency, to ensure that through the relevant protocol the particular needs of the industry are met, to grant a contracting state a degree of flexibility in adhering to the international regime by allowing to a well-defined and limited extent policy choices through declarations, and lastly, by these means, to give creditors in any transaction greater confidence in their decision to grant credit and enhance the credit receiving the receivables and reduce borrowing costs and credit insurance premiums to the advantage of all interested parties. So as the space sector continues to move towards privatization and more private players, the influx of more and more private capital is super important. And this private capital will not flow in until or unless there are financiers, lenders, and banks in the space sector that are willing to lend credit at an acceptable rate. And the space protocol tries to bring in all of these key objectives of the Cape Town Convention to the space sector. It tries to enhance legal predictability with regarding the financial viability of space equipment. It allows for the creation of autonomous interests in space equipment, which are internationally enforceable in all states that are parties to the convention and to the space protocol. And by creating this international electronic registry, the space protocol allows for interests within space assets to be internationally registered, thereby allowing any future investors or creditors in a particular asset to ensure or to just check a registry to ensure whether or not their asset is free of any pre-existing rights or interests. And then perhaps most importantly, what the space protocol does is that it provides creditors with a range of basic default and insolvency related remedies, where in the case that a company, and this happens quite often in the private sector, in the case where a space company goes bankrupt, that the financier is able to access those assets and deliver some additional value out of that investment. So what is the space protocol and how it works? As many of you being young students perhaps have already thought about setting up your own companies or establishing startups, might recognize that whenever a company or a person goes to the bank or goes to a financier to get access to credit or to get a loan, there are three primary factors that a bank or any financier will look at. The first one of these factors is the amount of the loan. The second one is the expected value of collateral which can be recovered in the case that you go bankrupt, net any costs of recovery. And then the third one is the degree of certainty over loan payments. And while the space protocol has no impact on the amount of the loan or the degree of certainty over loan payments, because both those factors are primarily upon the company itself, it really does impact the expected value of collateral which can be recovered, net any costs of recovery, because what it does is that it provides an international system of insolvency and secure transactions to allow creditors and financiers to recover their assets in the case of an insolvency. The scope of the space protocol, and these slides are quite important, so I'll just quickly double check. You can still see them, right? You can still see the slides?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yes.
Excellent. Right, so this is the scope of the space protocol, and so the space protocol applies to any spacecraft that can be uniquely identified, or any payload that can be uniquely identified. And in fact, it even applies to parts of spacecraft and parts of payloads, as long as they are uniquely identifiable and individually financeable. So if there's a particular space asset that is described or viewed as bankable by itself, such that an investor would want to invest in a particular object and it can be identified, it falls within the scope of the space protocol. The space protocol allows for the creation of 3 types of international interests in these types of space assets. These include security agreements, title reservation agreements, and leasing agreements. And then interests of the creditor within these types of assets for these types of interests are protected by registration in the International Registry. Once an interest is registered in the International Registry, it has priority over all subsequent registered interests and unregistered interests. And this is very important because if in the case of an insolvency, the financier then is able to exercise their interest and recover their investment. Now, you must be thinking how that would work in the case of a satellite, because a satellite is in space. So if a company goes bankrupt, how does a financier repossess a space asset, which is not like a car or not like a tractor that the bank can go to the road or the farm and then take their asset back? And the space protocol addresses these issues. So when under the Cape Town Convention, Article 11, there is a default, which is a situation which is either agreed mutually upon by the parties, or a standard default where payment is not made to the creditor. The space protocol provides for a system of assignability of debtors' rights and a system of repossession through transfer of tracking, telemetry, and control within a satellite or a space object. So when a satellite is in space, its most important economic value is the data that it provides, or is the information that it sends. And so for a financier to be able to derive value out of an insolvent debtor's space object, the financier has the opportunity through the space protocol to take control of the command codes of the space object and sell them on to another operator. In fact, Article 19 of the space protocol specifically allows for command codes within a space financing transaction to be placed with a neutral third party, so that in the case of a bankruptcy for a space debtor, the command codes or the TT&C documents of the space object automatically transfer to the creditor, which can then sell them forward. Additionally, the space protocol also has lots of other space-specific provisions, which include an exception for public services, so that there's no sudden loss of public services in cases of an insolvency. It includes a clause relating to salvage rights for insurers. It includes provisions for physically linked assets. It includes mechanisms for identification of space assets, and many others. And the paper that I plan on submitting alongside this presentation will delve into some of these more specifically. Now, I did put some example transactional structures in this slide, but I do understand that these are very technical and commercial, so I'm not going to go through them in detail. But what I will go through is a hypothetical transaction, which will follow on the next few slides, which will sort of help you understand more clearly what the space protocol is and what the space protocol does. So this is a typical leasing agreement, and this is a typical sale and leaseback agreement, which are both very common when it comes to high value equipment financing and are very commonly used in the aviation sector. And there are two types of agreements that the space protocol can really facilitate in the space sector as well. Now, if you look at this hypothetical, what it lays out is that suppose there is a new space company based in a developing country which is a signatory and has ratified the space protocol. They are manufacturing satellites at the rate of 35 million euros per satellite, and they're looking for funding. And then it points out that there's a bank, XYZ Bank, which is a commercial bank in a highly developed country, which normally only invests in companies with a AAA credit rating. Now, thanks to the certainty provided by the space protocol, XYZ Bank is able to offer a loan to ABC, the space company, which is looking to finance 10 satellites. And so upon accessing this loan, ABC sets up 10 special purpose vehicles, which is and to sort of finance these 10 satellites individually. And the deal is agreed, and XYZ Bank registers the international interest in all of these 10 satellites in the international registry, and then the parties agree that ABC will be in default if it has not paid back its debt for more than 2 months. So once this deal is agreed, once these 10 satellites have been financed, now they're in orbit, ABC launches them and is operating them for 6 months and continues to pay back its loans. But towards the end of its work, ABC now is running low on cash. And even though default hasn't really happened yet, ABC, thanks to the provisions of the space protocol, has the capacity to sell the ownership of these satellites to an anchor client or to a larger to a client that can take on board the obligations that ABC has towards XYZ Bank. So once ABC signs this agreement with this anchor client, what the space protocol allows this company to do is that it allows this company to assign debtors' rights, and namely, which are the rights of payment to XYZ Bank, and thereby allowing for the seamless creation of a structure whereby the loan obligations are taken on directly by this anchor client, and allows for the continued functioning of these satellites, and allows for XYZ Bank to continue to deliver value from their investment. And now scenario 2, which is sometimes more common, is a scenario where ABC now goes bankrupt, and XYZ Bank has to step in, and then thanks to the Cape Town Convention and the Space Protocol, XYZ Bank is easily able to repossess the command codes of these satellites and then sell them on to another operator, all through the international registry, and thereby ensuring that these satellites are still in space, continue to function, and continue to deliver value. So what the space protocol does is that it makes investments in space equipment less risky and more feasible for financiers from all parts of the world. These are some of the benefits the aircraft protocol and the MAC protocol of the Cape Town Convention either have already brought or are projected to bring. And the space protocol is also projected to bring similar benefits to the space sector. I understand I'm running a long time, so I will skip through it and come to this, which sort of highlights the startup financing cycle of any company in any sector. And you'll note that as time goes by, risk grows, but risk decreases, apologies, and different types of financing are available at different stages within the life cycle of a startup. And in interest and treaties such as the Space Protocol of the Cape Town Convention would be applicable where a startup has proven its technology and where a startup has started to go out and seek financing for the launch and development of its fleet or of its satellites. So for the space sector, the space protocol would kick in primarily at the early to late stage of investment, which is sometimes where companies find the most amount of difficulty in financing their operations. So in conclusion, with many new space companies being unable to get access to typical forms of financing, especially at later stages, and this is especially even more true now thanks to COVID, which has created a big gap in space financing, the ability to leverage assets in exchange for favorable lending terms may prove to be very important to allow companies within the new space sector to get access to capital. Furthermore, as most startups only have their idea or their assets to leverage and set as collateral, an instrument such as the Space Protocol would allow companies to rely upon their work and their technology to secure financing, as opposed to divesting their stocks or securing loans with very high interest rates. A treaty such as the Space Protocol can be very useful and key for a growing space economy like India, where there's more and more private companies that are entering the space sector and are looking for financing from creditors and financiers based in many different parts of the world. The Space Protocol would allow financiers to lend money with greater confidence and to provide credit at favorable terms. The space sector is projected to be 1.1 trillion or more by 2040, and the ability for players and companies within the space sector to get access to credit based entirely on their work is fundamental. And this is exactly what the Space Protocol promotes, with a goal to create a stable and secure legal environment for transactions in space assets based on a tried and tested mechanism of asset-based financing. I know Professor Bhatt mentioned that the Space Protocol hasn't entered into force yet, but rest assured, UNIDROIT continues to work with international organizations, governments, experts, and others in the space sector, including people in India, to allow governments to get a greater understanding of the Space Protocol and move towards its implementation. And with that, I would welcome any questions or concerns from any of the participants. And I'm available on email if you need any additional information. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.